It was 1962, in a small nightclub thick with cigarette smoke and low amber light, and Lenny Bruce was standing under a single spotlight, saying the things most comedians were still too afraid to say. The room was the kind of place that smelled of spilled whiskey and old wood, where the tables were small and close, and where the laughter came in careful bursts, as if the crowd was never quite sure whether they were allowed to enjoy this. Near the back of the room, a young man in a neat suit and a narrow tie sat watching him, the way a student watches a teacher he does not yet know he has. He was not laughing much. He was studying. Then the doors opened, and the police walked in. They did not hurry. They did not have to. They were not there for the crowd. They were there for the man on the stage. And when they were finished with him, one of them turned and looked at the young man in the suit and asked him a simple question that most people would have answered without a second thought. What that young man decided to say next would follow him for the rest of his life. His name was George Carlin, and on this night, almost nobody knew who he was. He was just another face in a nervous room, about to make a choice that no one asked him to make. Lenny Bruce was the reason Carlin kept coming back to rooms like this one. Carlin had discovered him the way a lot of young comics did, on a record, late at night, alone. And it had done something to him that a clean joke never could. Bruce did not tell jokes so much as think out loud, dangerously, about religion, about language, about the things you were supposed to leave alone. He treated the audience like adults. He treated words like they mattered. For a young comedian who had spent years learning to be pleasant, it was like hearing a door open in a house he did not know had another room. Carlin admired him. More than admired him. He studied Bruce the way a young musician studies a master, trying to understand not just what he did, but how he found the nerve to do it. He wanted to be near whatever it was that Bruce had, close enough to feel how it worked. So when he heard that Lenny Bruce was performing, he went. Not as a headliner, not as a peer, but as a young man in a suit who wanted to sit in the dark and watch someone be brave. He wanted to see, up close, what it looked like when a comedian told the truth and refused to apologize for it. He did not know that on this particular night, being in the room would cost him something. He did not know that watching would not be enough, that the night would reach out and pull him into the story, whether he wanted it or not, and that paying that price would turn out to be the best thing that ever happened to him. To understand what that night meant, you have to understand who George Carlin was in 1962, because he was not yet the man the world would remember. He was clean-shaven, sharply dressed, and carefully polite. He wore suits because that was what comedians wore. He worked clean because that was what got you booked. He had come up through radio, doing voices and quick jokes, and he had a partner for a while, doing an act that was smart but safe, the kind of comedy that could play a Tonight Show couch and a Midwestern supper club in the same season. He was good. Everyone said so. Bookers liked him. Audiences liked him. He knew how to read a room, how to land a line, how to leave them smiling on his way off the stage. He was on his way to becoming exactly the kind of successful, agreeable, forgettable entertainer that the business was built to produce. But he had grown up in a rough part of New York, a sharp kid with a sharper eye, the sort who noticed the difference between what people said and what they actually meant. And that boy had not disappeared under the suit. He was still in there, watching. and somewhere underneath the neat tie and the easy smile, a part of him already knew that being liked was not the same as being heard. He just had not found the words for it yet. He was a young man doing everything right, collecting the small approvals the business handed out, and quietly wondering why doing everything right felt so much like standing still. The set did not end the way sets are supposed to end. There was no final laugh, no applause building into the dark. Instead, there was a change in the air, the kind a room feels before it understands it. The officers moved toward the stage. The light seemed to get harder. Bruce, who had been through this before, did not fight it. He set the microphone down almost gently, the way you put down something you know you will have to pick up again. The crowd went very quiet. People looked at their drinks. Nobody wanted to be noticed, because being noticed on a night like this could mean being taken along. You could hear chairs shift, a glass set down too carefully. The small sounds a room makes when everyone in it is trying to disappear. They arrested him in front of everyone. There was no drama to it, no struggle. And somehow that made it worse. The ordinary efficiency of it. The sense that this was simply what happened to men who said too much. They walked him toward the doors while the room held its breath. And it should have ended there, with one man in handcuffs and a nervous crowd waiting for permission to leave. Most nights, that is exactly how it would have gone. The famous troublemaker taken away, the rest of the room emptying out into the cold, grateful to be forgotten. But then the police did something that turned a spectator's night into a decision. They began asking the people in the room to show identification. It was routine, almost bored, a way of reminding everyone who was in charge. And one by one the guests reached for their wallets, eager to prove they were nobody, eager to be allowed to go home. Until they reached the young man in the suit. It is hard now to explain how dangerous Lenny Bruce was allowed to be. In the early 1960s, there were words you could not say on a stage without a man in a uniform writing it down. There were subjects the law itself would step in to stop. Comedians were arrested, not for what they did, but for what they said. Bruce was arrested again and again, in city after city, until the courtrooms became almost a second stage, until fighting the charges cost him his money, his bookings, and slowly his health. He was not a criminal. He was a man who insisted that a comedian had the same right to speak as a poet or a preacher, and the country was not ready to agree with him. The people who ran the clubs were nervous every time he took the microphone, because a raid could close a room and ruin an owner. The police knew his name before he ever said it. And still he walked out under the light, night after night, knowing the risk, and said exactly what he meant anyway. That was the thing that fascinated Carlin most. Not the words themselves, but the refusal. The way Bruce would not shrink, would not soften, would not trade the truth for a safer laugh. In a business built on pleasing people, here was a man who had decided that some things mattered more than being liked. That was the man George Carlin had come to watch. And that was the man the police had come that night to take away. They put him in the back of the police wagon, and the doors closed, and in the sudden dark he realized he was not alone. Lenny Bruce was already in there. The man he had come to watch, the man whose record had opened that hidden room inside him, was sitting a few feet away in the same metal box, arrested on the same night, for the same refusal to be quiet. And Bruce, who had every reason to be bitter, looked at this young comedian in his ruined suit, this kid who had gotten himself arrested for nothing, and instead of anger, there was something almost like recognition. As the story is told, Bruce asked him what he had done to end up there. And when Carlin explained, Bruce did not lecture him. He understood him. Two comedians, one famous and one unknown, sitting in the back of a police wagon, sharing the strange, quiet pride of men who had refused to hand over more than the law was owed. It was not a triumphant scene. There were no cameras, no applause, no sense that history was being made. It was uncomfortable and cold and a little frightening. Two men in handcuffs breathing the same stale air, listening to the tires on the road, not knowing what the night would cost them. But George Carlin would carry that ride for the rest of his life, because in the dark of that wagon, he understood, for the first time, exactly the kind of comedian he wanted to become. And it was not the one in the neat suit. The officer stopped in front of George Carlin and asked to see his identification. It was the easiest request in the world. Everyone else in the room had already done it. All Carlin had to do was reach into his jacket, hand over a card, and go home. He had a career to protect. He had bookings, a reputation, a future that depended on being the reasonable one, the safe one, the one who never made trouble. And instead, he looked up at the officer and said that he did not believe people should have to carry identification. He said it calmly, not as a joke, not as a performance, as something he had apparently decided he actually meant, right there, in the worst possible moment to mean it. There was no career logic to it, no angle, no plan. It was simply the sharp kid from New York, the one who had been watching from under the suit all along, finally saying out loud what he thought. The officer did not find it charming. So the police took him, too. They put handcuffs on the clean-cut young comedian in the neat suit, the one who worked clean, the one who did everything right, and they walked him out of the club and into the night for the crime of standing next to the man he admired and refusing to look away. In a few seconds, without planning it, George Carlin had chosen a side. Nothing changed overnight. Carlin went back to his suits and his clean act, and for years he kept climbing the safe ladder, doing the television spots and the polite clubs, becoming more successful and more restless at the same time. But the night in the wagon never left him. It sat in him like a seed through the rest of the 1960s, while the country changed and he changed with it. And when he finally broke, when he grew his hair long and threw away the suit and started saying what he actually thought about language and power and the things you were not supposed to touch, he was not inventing a new person. He was becoming the man he had glimpsed in the back of a police wagon in 1962, sitting next to Lenny Bruce, learning that a comedian could be more than pleasant. He could be honest, even when honesty had a cost. Bruce did not live to see it. He was gone within a few years, worn down by the courtrooms and the fear, never fully understanding how much he had won. But George Carlin remembered. He spoke of Bruce with something close to reverence for the rest of his life. One man's courage passed quietly to another on the worst night of an ordinary week. They almost never talk about that night, a famous comedian and an unknown one in the same wagon for the same reason. Years later, when audiences called him fearless, when they marveled at how freely he said the unsayable, few of them knew that the courage had a source, that it had been handed to him once, quietly, by a man who paid for it with everything he had. Carlin never pretended he had invented himself. He knew whose example he was following. He knew that the door he walked through had been opened and held by someone else. But if you want to know where George Carlin really began, it was not on a stage. It was in the dark, in the back of a police wagon, beside the man who showed him it was worth the risk.